Welcome, everyone. We're going to review some of the aspects of the liver and look at some of the highlights from Dr. Sorensen's notes. You still need to read them, and we'll lecture on this when we get together next Wednesday. So when we're thinking about the liver and the impact of herbs on the liver, it's useful to think about its various functions. So one thing it does is metabolizes nutrients from food, such as transaminase enzymes to make different types of aminos, or more to the point of energy, something like gluconeogenesis. It produces bile, which helps us with fat absorption, which helps us with fat-soluble vitamins, and of course, bile acts as a conduit for toxins that the liver has rendered water-soluble and wants to get rid of. It provides some immunity against infection. It has various proteins that help with the immune response, and it has resident macrophages that can help filter the blood. Remember, all that blood from the portal system is filtered through the liver. It produces clotting substances. It produces a ton of proteins, a lot of the binding globulins, and certainly albumin itself come from the liver. It renders toxins, hopefully, harmless. And remember that there's a phase 1 and a phase 2 in liver metabolism. So phase 1, you'll recall, is the cytochrome P450 isozyme. And phase 2 are various side groups that render whatever the product of phase 1 was. It's usually an oxidative, oxidizing intermediary. It would be kind of dangerous if the liver just stopped there. And phase 2 tags it with something like glutathione, which makes it harmless and water soluble, and then the liver can get rid of it. So phase 1 and phase 2 both need to be on. An example of, a stress on the liver, and this is one of the ways that herbs can help, is if there's too much activation of a toxin. Let's take acetaminophen as an example. If somebody has a necrotizing dose of Tylenol, they took a ton, the liver transforms acetaminophen into a very toxic intermediary. It's very oxidatively active, but it sticks glutathione and I think the subtle groups onto it, and that renders it harmless. When someone takes a Tylenol overdose, 8 grams, 10 grams, they're going to be in big trouble because the liver will run out of phase 2 compounds like glutathione, and these metabolites of acetaminophen will literally wreak havoc in the liver. So some of the herbs work, like milk thistle, an example that will work to neutralize some of the toxins that happen while the liver's going about doing its work. There's a couple other uses of herbs that I think are pretty important with the liver. One are cholagogue or choleretic functions, so helping with the flow of bile. And that's important because bile is a way that the body gets rid of things it doesn't want. And of course, it helps with digestion. And then if we just look at inflammation over time, there are anti-inflammatory herbs, turmeric or artichoke to a certain extent, have this impact. And that's great in chronic liver diseases where we're trying to lower inflammation. So some of the anti-inflammatories overlap with the hepatoprotectives, so they're not two completely separate lists of herbs, but they're pretty useful. And don't underestimate the ability of bitter taste to cause things to happen. We know that bitter taste receptors get bile flowing, CCK is secreted. There's also emerging research about receptors in the gut that are specific for bitter taste type compounds, and when they're activated, it may reduce certain parameters associated with metabolic syndrome, like insulin resistance. So there's probably more going on with bitter taste than we've even realized to date. Now, I just wanted to look at Dr. Sorensen's notes a little bit with you. Give these a read. Choleretics and cholagogues are two terms that you should know by now. So choleretics increase production of bile, so kind of bile in the liver. Cholagogues stimulate flow of bile from the liver and certainly contraction of the gallbladder. So choleretics, in theory, should get more bile produced, and cholagogues, in the sense of flow, should get bile flowing. An alternative is something that is supportive to the organ and is generally, in this case, generally detoxifying, and here hepatoprotective, tropho-restorative antioxidants are important as well. So I mentioned anti-inflammatory properties. That's an important physiological consideration, but hepatoprotective would be something like milk thistle, which you know well. Or if we took curcuma longa, turmeric, this is hepatoprotective. It's also anti-inflammatory, and I think that's an important issue, especially when we have people with chronic hep C infection and things like that. So taraxacum, again, you've seen this herb before a few times. It has bitter properties in it, the sesquiterpene lactones for sure, as well as triterpene steroids. It is not only a cholagogue choleretic, but is actually a pretty good hepatoprotective in its own right. So it is at least an alternative, and it has these anti-inflammatory hepatoprotective properties as well. So it's really a good all-around liver tonic. It's good to support in detoxes. Here's some good dosing information for you. We can talk a bit more about this in class. Chicory has been around a long time. Galen referenced it as the friend of the liver. It is a nutritive plant. It has things like inulin in it and some bitter principles. It's sometimes taken roasted as a coffee substitute. This does cause some changes. It makes it more aromatic. And also a source of potassium, iron, and so it has nutritive properties as well. So it is good for dyspepsia. It's an appetite stimulant. It's a secretagogue because of that bitterness. And there's some research updates here that would be best to go over in class, just to kind of look at the expanded use of chicory. It does have some possible emetagogue effects, so just watch out in pregnancy there. All right, Sinicus benedictus, or blessed thistle, is another cholagogue plant here. Again, there's your sesquiterpene lactones, glycosides in this case, so they have a sugar attached to them. It has some other useful compounds as well, some triterpenoids, and it can be used in a way similar to dandelion. It's a great secretagogue. So think about somebody elderly, for instance, who doesn't digest protein very well. They've lost some of their, secretagogue function from the stomach. They don't make a lot of stomach acid. They eat protein. It tends to sit around in their stomach. We don't want them just to live on carbs. We want to stimulate digestion, and here's a way to do that at the early end of the meal. This is something they might optimally take 10 minutes before eating. Burdock is one of the more versatile herbs in this category. The way to think about burdock is as a purifying or depurative herb, a general alternative, and so it has cholagogue choleretic functions. It's also going to act as a detoxifying herb. It was used traditionally for people with psoriasis, very difficult to treat eczema, so skin conditions where you want some detoxification and you want anti-inflammatory properties. And it turns out that it may do something to alter the balance of cyclic GMP and AMP in the skin cells, in the epithelial cells in psoriasis, and make things a little less inflamed. So there's several herbs that can do that. Arctium is one of them, and it may have a cancer preventive effect, a desmutagen, and it may have what we would say are chemopreventive properties, which means slows down some of the metabolic processes that could increase cancer risk or strengthens some of the processes that lower cancer risk. So for instance, some chemopreventives induce more P53 gene. Some of the pathways are listed here by Dr. Sorensen as to why this might have anti-inflammatory actions and why it may be a desmutagen. So again, when you think about people with liver diseases, right, exposure to toxins, which can be mutagens, or hepatitis C, hepatitis B, one of the main concerns for those patients are eventually getting carcinoma, hepatocellular carcinoma. So these herbs are not only anti-inflammatory, they may be preventive long-term for these patients. So they're a good idea. Rumex crispus or yellow dock is a cholagogue. Remember, it's also containing anthraquinone glycosides, and we looked at what those guys do this week. It's going to be a mild laxative effect with this. This isn't a strong purgative, but it's going to have a mild laxative effect. We also looked at walnut hulls and what happens with those, and we saw they were very astringent, very antiseptic, but also kind of a laxative, so, and possibly anthelmintic, so helping expel intestinal worms. So it is also a cholagogue. Neem, take a look at this before Wednesday. It is an herb that has an Ayurvedic history, and it definitely has uses in GI, but also skin diseases, and these really cool antimicrobial functions. Finally, globe artichoke is, at least in terms of anything that's possibly new to you, globe artichoke is another cholagogue, but a very good hepatoprotective and possibly lowering lipids as well. Don't expect it to be like some kind of natural Lipitor or Crestor. It's not going to lower lipids that aggressively, but it will possibly bring LDL down a little bit. It's really good when someone has some triglyceride accumulation. Those patients that have been eating a lot of sugar, drinking a lot of sugar, a lot of high fructose corn syrup, where they have triglyceride accumulation in the liver, which is what you're going to get from big gulps and desserts and Coke and all these other things. This is a very good cholagogue for someone who has accumulation of fats in the liver. Now, milk thistle you would have looked at in Try 5 in BotMed 1. This is something we can review more closely in class, something some of you will look at further in Try 8. Important things about milk thistle are it is hepatoprotective. In Europe, it's used for treatment after people get mushroom poisoning, although it's given in conjunction with conventional therapy. So it's used as adjuvant care, and it's used in an IV format, so it's given as an injection. I'd recommend, if you're using it for a detoxification purpose, give a standardized extract, and there's even some standardized extracts now that come in a phytosome or even a microsome, and so it's really well absorbed, and serum levels of the active ingredients, which are collectively called silymarin, go up a lot higher. So you get better plasma levels of silymarin, more of it gets to the liver, and it can protect the liver from certain toxins. That's probably the best way to go. I have nothing against the tincture, but it's just not going to deliver as many helpful flavonolignans, which we call silymarin, as a standardized extract. The standardized extract is 80% silymarin, and you can get doses that are really super absorbable.